Hi and welcome to the Campus Experts Community Management module. By the end of this module, you should understand why online spaces are an important tool for our members. You should understand and be able to recognize what troublesome behavior and trolls look like. And you should have an effective toolkit for how to deal with that behavior when it arises. That means dealing with trolls, dealing with things like conflict resolution, dealing with things like how much of your community should be active at any one time. You're going to see a talk by Lee Dome. Lee Dome is the community manager for Atom and Electron, two of the largest open source projects. Lee manages those communities for GitHub, and through his years of community management in various different roles and at this one, he's learned an awful lot about the art of community management online. Lee presented a talk to our spring 2017 cohort of Campus Experts, so we'll be going over to that in a short while. As well as the webinar itself, the video that's going to be included does also include the Q&A. The Campus Experts who participated in that video asked some really great questions, and I highly recommend that you stick around to watch them. So let's put this in context. Why are we talking about online community when Campus Experts deals with communities on campus in a physical space? Well, that's because although your community is based on a campus and so shares some ideal physical proximity, so it's possible for you to do offline events and offline spaces, those spaces aren't always accessible to everyone all the time. For example, you might be doing a weekly meetup. Well, how does a community collaborate and work together in the space in between those meetups? And if I'm a member of your community that needs those meetups, say it's a weekly coursework clinic, and I need help now, what do I do? And what do I do if I can't get to the meetup that week? It's these things that make online spaces really powerful. The other thing that's really great about online spaces versus offline spaces is questions asked in them or resources posted to them are part of the written record. They stay around forever and they have permanent. If I come and meet you at a meetup and I ask you a question, you give me a really fantastic answer, unless I was thoughtful enough to write it down right there in a minute, the answer's lost forever and no one else can benefit from it. Whereas if we share an online space and I ask a question and you come in and write me a really fantastic answer, it's there, it's part of the record. I can share it, people can post it, we can copy and record that. There are lots of different types of online spaces where student groups gather. Some of you are probably aware of Hackathon Hackers, the Facebook network. There's also a lot of online chat applications such as WhatsApp and WeChat, which are really popular with student groups, especially in China. Some universities such as Edinburgh are big fans of IRC, and I know that some student leaders are now starting to experiment with newer platforms like Slack. And when you're running these online spaces, it's often important to make sure that you can moderate them. And by moderating them, I don't mean that you're censoring the content or you're trying to keep people on a certain topic. Because fundamentally, if you're bringing a group of people together who have shared interests, eventually they're going to diverge from those interests and they're going to explore the territory around it and they're going to explore topics that are tangential to it. But as we have these spaces where anyone can post anything and discussions can go any direction, it's important that moderators are there to make sure that everyone is happy, safe and comfortable and the conversation stays productive. And this isn't to say that just because you've got an online space, there's going to be arguments and there's going to be trolls. It's perfectly possible to have an online space that has very few arguments at all. But nonetheless, you're going to want some moderation presence first of all, spammers are going to happen. Your online group is a group of students who are interested in tech. That's attractive to recruiters, it's attractive to other people who want to tap that audience. So being able to moderate that and keep spammers low is really important. But eventually you may also run into problems with trolls, you may run into problems with abusive actors. And in the video that follows, Lee is going to give you some tactics for dealing with those people.
Yeah, so I'm Lee. I've been a professional developer for over 20 years. I've been at GitHub for about a year and a half now, and been working on Atom for almost 4 years, so 3.5, something like that. So that's not what I'm here to talk about. As I mentioned, I've been the moderator for Discuss, the official Atom message board, since March of 2014, basically right after Atom Beta was released. I was just kind of helping out on the message board and they liked what I did. So they said, hey, you want to do this officially? And I said, sure. Okay. And so that's how I got started with Atom. Long ago, I had a message board that actually wasn't my modem, but it was a cool picture. So I had a one-line BBS in the early 90s. That was my first experience with moderating. And I've done all kinds of moderation for gaming groups and message boards and things like that ever since. So had quite a bit of experience with it. So I'm here to talk about community. So how does one build a community? Well, humans are naturally social creatures. There's really just a couple of simple rules. And the rules are don't drive people away and don't let others drive people away. Then community just kind of happens because humans are social creatures. So how do we avoid driving people away and how do we stop others? Well, many see forums as an opportunity to do battle, right? They're just there to wage war. And Others only see forums as a place to vent their frustrations. We want to create a place where encouragement is the primary topic. So how do we encourage people to work together as a community? Well, one of the ways that we do that is we have to, as moderators, we have to invest some effort to kind of turn negative situations around. So I have kind of this metaphor that I use. Like many people my age, I grew up on kung fu movies. Every Sunday morning, they had, kung fu movies back to back for like 3 hours. And I couldn't wait to be old enough to do it myself. So when I got older, I studied two martial arts, and they couldn't have been more different from each other. The first was Kenpo Karate. Kenpo is a very aggressive martial art. The objective is to destroy your opponent, literally make it so that they are no longer capable of attacking you. My second week, we learned a maneuver called the leap of death. That's really what it's called. When somebody tries to strike you, you break their arm, throw them on the ground, do a rabbit punch, and jump up and land with your heels in their kidneys, and then basically spit on them as you walk away. Well, we kind of added that last part. But anyway, so that gives you an idea of what Kenpo is about. But after that, I learned Aikido. And Aikido is a very defensive martial art. It's about recognizing, redirecting the flow of energy in kind of a dance between the two of you. Even the terminology is very different. Instead of an opponent, you call them a partner. The objective is essentially to get them to see that violence or attacking you is futile. So it's kind of more like fighting to a draw instead of like actually fighting to win. So the way that I like to think of this technique is as conversational Aikido. And in Aikido, there's 4 steps in every maneuver. So there's conflict, awareness, blending, and resolution. So conflict, basically, is there a difference of opinion, right? Aikido is about awareness. So because sometimes people just argue even when they're agreeing. So you have to be aware before you step in, you have to be aware that whether there's really a conflict or not. So you recognize that through awareness. Basically, you listen, you strive to understand not just the issue at hand, but the people behind it and their motivations. And then there's blending, and blending is really the heart of Aikido. Essentially, the objective here is to move out of the line of fire. The best description of Aikido for me was if somebody's trying to stab you, don't be so rude as to stand in their way. They're obviously trying to shove the knife in a certain direction, so you get out of their way and let them do it, right? Basically, the way I remember this is they can't attack you if you're behind them. Once you're out of the line of fire, take their side, right? Basically, respectfully and sincerely agree. You can always find some common ground. You can use phrases like, I understand that, or I know it's frustrating when, or things like that. And so basically, when you're agreeing with them, when you're both going the same direction, you can influence them left or right? But when you use the Kenpo approach, which is what most people use, basically you're just beating heads against each other, and neither of you go anywhere. So it doesn't change anything. And then resolution, basically keep in mind discussions don't have to be zero-sum games. There doesn't have to be a winner and a loser. You can both win if you basically just kind of both get on the same side and go the same or similar directions, right? But occasionally, sometimes talking is the problem. Sometimes you're the problem, right? Sometimes you're burnt out, you're stressed. So the idea is to just kind of like put down the keyboard and nobody gets hurt, right? Sometimes you just need to take a break. And rarely any subject is so important that it requires your response. The things that do require a response generally don't require it right now. So you can always take a step back. Nobody's going to die because you didn't respond to a message board post. So just take a break, right? And then come back to it a few hours later, after you've eaten, after you've taken a nap or what have you, and gotten a good night's sleep, gone to see a movie, whatever, and then come back and come back to it fresh. I learned this one little trick. There's this management technique called extinction, and it's a strategy for discouraging undesirable behavior. And note that I'm talking about undesirable behavior and not improper behavior. Patterns that are negative, but otherwise salvageable, right? So not trolls. We'll get to them in a little bit. Extinction basically is when you're in a room with somebody and they act out or they do something that's undesirable, you just stop talking. There's a reason why it's called an uncomfortable silence. People, at least in the Western world, get uncomfortable with that, and it calls out the behavior, but without targeting a particular person. And so it discourages them from acting out in that way, but it also doesn't publicly shame them. It's a little bit tougher to do online, but if you're a reasonably active participant, people will notice when you stop participating, right? Especially if it's in a thread that you have been participating in so far, right? And you just kind of, oh, yeah, I've been talking to you until, you cross that line, and now this is unproductive and I'm not talking to you anymore. And people will figure it out. But there's times when it's, people that intentionally just don't get it. So how can we recognize that intent and separate it from honest actions? Basically, trolls have common features. They are disrespectful. They attack the person and not the idea. This is, moderation 101. Basically, that's the easiest way to recognize when somebody's being a troll, or at least just being rude. I tend to equate the two of them, but that's me. Also, trolls are inflexible, right? They refuse to acknowledge conflicting information, right? The point of a discussion is to exchange ideas. And when people just keep arguing a point over and over and over again, probably they're a troll. They're also argumentative and demanding. So, why is Adam so slow? Why CoffeeScript? Why this? Why that? Right? Basically, they want you to justify yourself to them. They're taking the dominant role in the conversation, and it's like, I don't have to justify myself to you. Step off. So, and then they defend all of this with free speech, and others are too sensitive. And no, if you're unable to stop yourself from hurting people, we have some words for that, like asshole. So how do we deal with trolls once we've recognized them? Well, as a user, you really have kind of limited options. Basically, you can notify administrators and hope they take care of it, or just walk away. But you should, and you have the right to expect that moderators should, step one, call out the behavior by issuing an official warning and make it clear, and this is important, make it clear that your interpretation of the behavior is not up for debate. Because a lot of times people will try and turn it around on the moderator. They'll say, oh, no, you're being rude by calling out my behavior. Or, why is this behavior not okay? Or they'll try to create a dialogue around the moderation. And no, stop. This is not up for debate. And then step two is, if it continues, just ban them, right? You don't have to wring your hands over it. You don't have to worry about it. Just ban them. For every single bad person, they're driving away 20 good people that want to contribute, but turn away from your community because they see these people and they just don't want to deal with it. And you can't expect things to get better if there aren't consequences for negative actions, and swift and immediate consequences also. So the thing to remember is the most important thing is the community, not the moderator, not any individual or clique of members. The community is the most important thing. because the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. Thanks. That's my presentation.
So what's some ways that we can increase kind of community engagement, or what are some ways that we can bring more of the community in to actually actively participate in whatever platform we want to?
There's some ratios that have been fairly firmly established, which is 99 and 1, which is basically 90% of the community will just lurk or just watch. They will solely consume. The 99% will participate. Typically, they'll like comment on things, or and then 1% will actually produce things. So, like in the case, Flickr was the one that originally kind of established this, and so 90% will just look at the pictures, 9% will comment on pictures, and 1% will actually produce pictures. In message boards, it's a little bit similar. Basically, 90% of the community will just read. 9% will comment on other people's posts, and then basically 1% will kind of start their own posts. There's really not much you can do to change those ratios. They're pretty fixed throughout the industry. It's basically just kind of human behavior as far as we can tell. So basically the only thing that you can do is just kind of try to increase the size of your community. And one of the ways to do that is to basically just make it welcoming, right? Kick out the bad people and try to get the word out about your community, and, let people know that they have somebody to come to if they have a problem.
When you're trying to form communities together, what should you be aware of? Kind of the pros and cons of it, and if you should be pursuing it.
So basically, it sounds like what you're asking is you have multiple different communities that don't typically congregate, and you're trying to bring them together in one area.
Yes.
Okay. So basically, the main thing to keep in mind is that and this is what I call kind of a confederation of communities. Basically individual communities will have different cultures, and sometimes those cultures will clash. Let's say, for sake of argument, the Young Republicans Club will clash with the Feminists Club, right? Not necessarily, but possibly, right? And so just kind of maybe putting them on opposite sides of the quad or whatever might be good, but keeping, but also the main thing I think is just establishing the ground rules, kind of making sure there's a code of conduct and making sure everybody's aware of it, making sure that people will be held to the code of conduct, and they won't be invited back, right? If it's just a one-time event, then it's a little bit harder because a lot of the teeth of a code of conduct is that basically you won't be invited to the next one, right? And if it's a useful event for people to showcase their club, then they want to be invited to the next one, right? So that's, I hope that helps.
Definitely helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we had a discussion in Slack a few weeks ago about things like Slack versus Facebook and things like that for community management of smaller communities. I was just wondering what your take was on different tools of when is it more appropriate to maybe use something like a forum, or when is it maybe more appropriate to use something that's more just like Facebook, where it's just sort of you put something up and you can get a few comments on it. What are your experiences with the different tools?
So personally, you should be using all of them. Use all the tools. Basically, different people prefer to communicate in different ways. So some people will just hang out on Slack and won't use Facebook. Some people will use Facebook and not hang out on Slack. Some people will do both. Some people prefer in-person interactions. So you basically should be investigating multiple ways for your community to communicate, and trying to kind of create ways for those communication mediums to cross over. So like if you can have a bot that will kind of say, hey, this is a popular post on the Facebook group, and once a day kind of pipe up and say, hey, people, check out this new thing on the Facebook group, or vice versa, right? Basically, here's the log of an interesting interaction on Slack, and post that to Facebook, and so kind of encouraging cross-pollination of ideas so that you don't get idea islands, for lack of a better term.
The kind of incentive stuff that are kind of built into discourse, and how useful do you find those things, like post, or like incentivizing more posting and more activity? I think some of the forums I used to be a member of would have like, top poster of the month and kind of things like that. But what's your take on that?
So actually so they did add badges to some slight gamification mechanisms to discourse, but I do kind of agree with Jeff Atwood, the one of the co-designers of Stack Overflow and the head of discourse, and in that you don't want to just willy-nilly incentivize posting. Basically, you want to incentivize reading, and so because basically people want to be heard, right? And so lots of people will come and just kind of not read the thread and then post their comments on it. Maybe they'll read the first couple of sentences of the first post and then drop to the bottom and go, right? And that's not what you want, right? What you want is for people to read the entire thread and then post cogent thoughts and things that will actually move the conversation forward. So there's stuff built into discourse around trust levels, which basically the way to get from trust level 0, a brand new user, to trust level 1 is to actually read for 10 minutes. You can't make it to trust level 1 without reading. And most of the gates between trust levels are centered around reading. Posting is a very, very tiny part of it, and I kind of agree with that. And so a lot of the other ones are around liking. And so, yeah, basically so I have I should have added it to my presentation, but I have a repository on GitHub, github.com/lee-dome/community-manager. And in there, in there are links to a bunch of basically a bunch of my writings and a bunch of other people's writings. But there's one where Jeff Atwood talks about why they designed discourse around incentivizing reading. I forget what the title is, but it's one of all of Jeff Atwood's links in that README there are worth reading. So I would recommend checking those out.
Great, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the webinar. So now that you've seen that talk and you understand some methods around dealing with troublesome actors in your online communities, it's time to talk about the exercise for this module. The exercise for this module is actually going to be to run a case study on some online interaction and how it could have been better moderated. You can find a full description of the exercise, as always, in the exercises folder of this directory. So your task is to find some online interaction, be that in a community you run or in another community such as Hackathon Hackers or a forum somewhere on the internet, and analyze how that interaction could have been better handled using the techniques you covered in the webinar. If there wasn't a moderation decision that took place, what moderation decision could have taken place and how could the situation have been handled? Or if there was a moderation action that took place, how could that action have been performed differently and what would the outcome have been on the conversation and on the wider community? If you're struggling to find an example to run a case study on, we've included some places you can look in the README below. Once you've completed that exercise, submit it in the usual way, making sure to apply the correct labels. If you're not sure how to submit an exercise to a training module, you can find the description in the README.